Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, June 19th, 2023. Time for another show, time for another federal holiday. So that's good news. If you're lucky enough to have the day off, fantastic, wonderful. As a matter of fact, shall we surmise that John Shiflett has the day off from this? I see there's it's no pressure, John. It's okay to take it. There it is. Oh, okay. All right. I didn't mean to scare you or anything. But I was wondering whether we could conclude from the fact that there was no morning message from John on Mastodon that he was either a federal worker or was busy with something else or his alarm was broken or something. I don't know. I didn't know what to take from that. But now we can take nothing except for the fact that he is, I don't know, so he was a little bit late, a few seconds, literally just a few seconds behind, just like I was today. There's no shame in that. And being a few seconds behind, well, we just assume you were doing something fantastic or interesting at the time. And thank you. And then here it is. Okay, just letting us know that we're on the air. I am glad to know this as well. Greg's glad to know it. The raft of stories is building and already making its way down the mighty Mississippi at this point. And let's see, so much to catch up on. So much that I didn't even know happened until I got up this morning and said I'd better prepare for a 2-hour show, recapping the weekend. I do see this is not great news, and I bet this is in the roundup too because it's one of the top Washington Post headlines. Just interesting, I guess, in terms of, there's a lot that can be read out of this, from this. The headline here reads that the FBI, you know who they are, right? Resisted opening a probe into Trump's role in January 6th for more than a year. And there's a lot of bad things that you can read into that. I don't know if there's any good things you can read into that one. But, or I guess you could say, well, we admire the restraint of the Justice Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation at diving headlong into an investigation. It's a traumatic and difficult thing to deal with. I mean, so's a coup, but it's a traumatic and difficult thing to deal with to formally acknowledge that we need to investigate a former president for his role in a coup. But I mean, that's what happens when you have coups, I guess. So I don't know, but we'll see whether they had admirable restraint or whether they were, in some cases, probably tripped up, perhaps, by having to overcome the resistance of people who are now witnesses before grand juries and January 6th committees, et cetera, or who were witnesses and who now have been transformed by the Republican domination of the House into witnesses against the charges that the government came down on the heads of them because they were whistleblowers for saying, no, I won't actually initiate an investigation, or for filing reports that said that nothing wrong was done on January 6th, or what have you. But perhaps we can sort through that one. Looks to be a rather lengthy read, but I don't know. Well, we may have to dive into that at some point, or that may be the week's work to catch up on all these things. All right. Well, the Trump cases continue apace. Nobody had any chance to screw things up in court just yet, but more word about the squabbling among the Trump attorneys. We've had a couple of them drop out or seek to remove themselves from the cases, and we can catch up on all of that. First, we got to listen to the phone ringy ding and connect there and make sure everything is all okay and working. Let's try it. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. How are you?
You had me for a second. See, everybody's delaying for just 1 second to screw things up. Okay. All well? Good. How's your weekend? How's your Juneteenth going?
Fine.
We're lagging
that was just me.
today. Okay.
Just
yeah. Fine. All right. Yes, so congratulations to everybody who's got the day off. Wonderful. Not all federal workers, or all the federal workers are, but not everybody who's off is a federal worker. It's spreading throughout the land as planned and declaring the new federal holiday. Thanks, Joe, if you were looking for somebody to thank for that one.
Hey, my electrician's coming this afternoon to fix a bulky outlet, so not everybody has the day off.
That's true. Most people probably don't, but
which is too bad, because then you can't go buy mattresses or whatever you do on President's Day.
They got to come up with some kind of special sort of sale that's more interesting, appropriate, or just something else that's on sale that's not on sale all the time anyway.
Well, this is a capitalistic society, so the whole idea there is to capitalize on Juneteenth and steal the money from black people.
Yeah, right. So let's get started.
How else do you honor Juneteenth, really?
It seems to be that's the MO for almost everything else. So, yeah, all right. Well, right, like I said, you could put the Halloween candy out in the stores now. It's Juneteenth. Time to go.
Yeah, something like that. Time for, Christmas stuff.
Right.
So the Washington Post not just printed the story,
newspaper,
which was of interest, about the FBI being slow and conservative.
Yes. Right. That's the way they do things.
They also did us the helpful favor of printing it up in list form where you can read it really quickly.
Yes, okay.
If you don't want to read it
I would like to do that.
So, during the first 9 months after the January 6th attack, the Justice Department chose to primarily pursue cases against rioters and overruled prosecutors who argued that the department should also investigate the role of figures in Trump's orbit.
All right, and I think they should.
So, senior leaders at the top, whether it's Christopher Wray or I don't remember when Rod Rosenstein was or wasn't there. He's sort of like a shadow figure these days.
Yeah, that's true.
But there were Trump people at the top who probably didn't want their own role looked at either. So Garland didn't clean house immediately. Anyway. But Lisa Monaco and Merrick Garland are in charge. They got to it. Key Justice Department officials ultimately pivoted after concluding they had sufficient evidence and that prosecuting rioters provided no clear path to examining the nonviolent efforts by the former president and his allies.
The nonviolent efforts, yes. Well, I guess comparatively speaking.
In other words,
compared to the rioters,
they had a theory of the case.
Okay.
And they were going to pick up rioters and then slowly, one by one, build on that to get to the people who told the rioters to go and then people who told the rioters to go. And eventually they decided that wasn't working. And then, although they don't say it here,
sounded like it was
the January 6th committee came around and said, you know what, this, and this. And the Justice Department, in 2 words, said, holy shit.
Hey, did they say that? That's
they
great.
said, oh my goodness.
Yes, that's probably what they're very conservative there.
Heavens to Betsy.
Maybe.
There's evidence here.
Yes. It did seem at the time like the January 6th committee had gotten ahead of where they were and that they were batting cleanup and saying, all right, I guess you're right.
This isn't a defense of the Justice Department, but you'll also recall
that wasn't
that the Justice Department and the January 6th committee were arguing about stuff.
Yes.
DOJ said, give us your stuff, and January 6th committee said, not till we're done.
Yes, right. And we're the ones actively developing a case here.
But that also, not in the article, slowed things down at DOJ.
I could see that. Right, we'll just wait here.
So, in other words,
hammock until
it's already a difficult decision. It's a momentous decision. If we do this, stuff's going to hit the fan, without question. Heavens to Betsy's going to hit the fan.
Betsy,
or
cut
Betsy.
It out. What are you doing? Switch off with Murgatroyd.
So you have to make sure you have a solid case.
Yes.
And if evidence is known to be in existence of being held from you, you're going to tell the eager people who want to go ahead and prosecute, you got to wait for stuff. And eventually they were convinced by the weight of the evidence that they have to do this. The decision to charge militia members who were at the Capitol with seditious conspiracy, a step prosecutors thought could pressure them to implicate architects of the attack, was slowed as the Biden Justice Department waited months for Senate confirmation of senior leaders. Again, there was an FBI and a Justice Department full of Trump people. They had to get rid of them. Get their own people first. Mm-hmm. And that contributed to the slowdown as well. In other words, it wasn't a deliberate decision by Jeff Clark or a figure like him to say whatever comes up, we're going to bury it. And it wasn't exactly a decision by Merrick Garland to say we're not touching this. It was a decision by Merrick Garland to say we're not touching this unless it's like super duper solid.
True.
And there were some decisions from my senior people.
There were decisions, poor decisions, unofficial decisions made by people who thought that there was really nothing wrong and who ended up becoming the supposed whistleblowers for the current Republican committee investigating all these things. But yeah, from the top, they just said, well, we definitely have to go slow and be careful. And that's
we have to be
what
careful.
You expect from them.
Be careful begats going slow. They didn't say we have to go slow. They said we have to be careful.
They said we have to. Yeah. So that's the nature of them, and that's kind of where you want the DOJ generally.
In a way, you certainly don't want them to be overly political, like Bill Barr, who would have jumped on it. John Durham, like the next day.
Right.
In early 2021, the Justice Department rejected a federal watchdog's proposal to investigate evidence its office had found suggesting coordinated effort to swing the election for Trump using slates of alternate electors. Well, they've fixed that problem.
Yeah, maybe.
That's Smith's next indictment. Certainly Fani Willis's.
Yes, I'm
the FBI
waiting for
Washington
punishment.
Field Office twice in 2021 rebuffed a federal prosecutor's request for agents in February for the probe of whether Trump associates were linked to the riot, and in November to investigate how Trump associates tried to overturn the election results. That's Washington Field Office level. FBI, part of DOJ, but sort of separate from DOJ.
Yes.
By the first anniversary of the attack, the team probing whether the former president and his allies sought to illegally block the certification of the election consisted of just 4 prosecutors. 3 of whom had started yesterday, and one was a junior G-Man badge that he got in a, cereal box. So it really didn't start up at FBI till April of 2022. So this is Aaron Davis and Carol Lennig. And basically, if Carol Lennig writes it, it's true.
Oh, well, okay. Vote of confidence, yeah.
So
it to be mostly true.
I'm inclined to, take this approach. They were slow. They could have moved faster. It's easy to see that they were being cautious and that they didn't want to get involved in political stuff if they didn't have to. And whether or not that was a good decision or a correct decision is different than they were deliberately slow walking it. That's nuance there. That's not exactly what happened.
Okay.
They were being cautious, perhaps overly cautious. Not the end of the world.
Frequently are. But, yeah. Right. I mean, you heard it. It was pretty obvious in their demeanor right away. And clearly they were investigating what happened on January 6th right away, and they didn't delay in that. But the implications were huge. And both politically, electorally and politically, as well as, problems with governance. Like, what do we do with the fact that, we're going to have to bring to a current president the request to go ahead and investigate direct connection in a would-have-been coup by the immediate former president who, in all likelihood, will be running against you. So there's 10 layers of problems in that.
Right. Wow. I mean, and you could just take a different issue, which is related but different.
All right.
And see how it's a problem.
Yes, we'll do that then.
Why didn't you go after Jared Kushner? Oh, yeah? Why didn't you go after Hunter Biden? I mean, I could see why you wouldn't want to just step on that unless you had real clear evidence about what was going on.
Yes, and certainly the emerging evidence in the immediate aftermath was not really pointing to Jared Kushner very much. It was really pointing directly to Donald Trump, and so they were treading lightly as it was. But yeah, I don't know. I still think they have a ways to go to build a case against Jared Kushner for January 6th? Is that what we're saying?
No, I'm just saying building cases against political figures who are in the news. Do you go after them? Right. Do you go after their family who are clearly grifters and crooks? Well, yeah, but
those who were in the White House. Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. You would need evidence. Naturally, we would get around to that eventually.
No, well, Barr and Durham didn't need evidence.
Okay, that's a good point, too. That's right. I guess that's, again, an old-timey assumption that you make about, or you can still make it about justice departments under Democratic administrations. They still need evidence, but the other ones don't.
Again, you could turn around and say, well, Merrick Garland didn't want to look like Bill Barr, and he didn't want to look like John Durham, so he waited until there was a solid case.
Yeah.
Did he wait too long? Probably. Was it malicious? No.
Okay.
In the end, was it the right decision? If Trump gets convicted by Jack Smith, who freaking cares?
Right. That would be good. It would be, I know that there was a lot of hope that, let's have it happen earlier so that there's no charges that it's influencing the election. But, I mean, it's going to influence the election. It doesn't matter when you do it. It's going to influence the election. The guy running for office is either suspected of, actively under investigation for, or on trial for a seditious conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States. When do you want to do it?
Well, and arguably he's running because he's accused of those things.
Yes, that's right. He says so now pretty much openly. Apparently that's one of his new demands. Which is why
my pundit roundup headline today was Trump can run, but he can't hide.
Oh, well, there it is.
It's the whole idea.
He can't hide. That's true. He's I bet he's one of the worst hide-and-seek players ever in the history of the game.
I would think so.
He's difficult to hide.
I mean, the orange glow comes right through the drapes.
I mean, it's iridescent. It's difficult to, just look for.
It's radioactive.
There's an electric pumpkin hiding under the sink, apparently. Oh, it's the boss. What do you know?
So some of the stories we covered, and again, I'm afraid
he makes his employees
I'm only going to be able to do a half-hour show today. It looks like.
Well. Harumph. I'll be quiet.
I'm working on my voice. It's sort of there, but every once in a while you can hear me like, where's that cough button?
Right. That's certainly true. Okay, well, this is really lingering for you. No problem.
Unfortunately. I mean, the rest of it's getting better. I feel a whole lot better.
Juneteenth will cure you.
That'll be true. Peter Wenner has a really interesting and good article in The Atlantic.
Good.
Morality is for Trump what colors are to the colorblind.
Okay.
That is to say, other people can see it, but he can't.
What are you talking about? Where is it? Okay. Yeah.
The majority of his enablers, however, still know right from wrong. And the reason it's a good article is that it hones in on the issue. Trump isn't the issue. He's completely amoral. He's incapable of recognizing morality. We understand that. He's a fabulist. He's a Baron von Munchausen. We know that.
Yes.
That's not the issue. He's a vote of one. The reason he was in office and the reason he's running and the reason he's a threat are the people who follow him, not him. So the majority of his enablers still know right from wrong. They know he did wrong stuff. They can say he's my team, as many of the polls over the weekend highlighted. But they understand that he screwed up and did something wrong.
Okay.
So I think it's important to highlight that. Trump doesn't just cross moral lines. He doesn't appear capable of understanding moral categories. But what's true of Trump isn't true of the majority of his enablers. They see the colors that Trump can't. They still know right from wrong, but for a combination of reasons, they've consistently overridden their conscience, in some cases unwittingly, in some cases cynically.
Okay, I can see that.
I would say the majority of cases cynically. They've talked themselves into believing or half believing that Trump's America's martyr and America's savior, and I don't even think that that's half true.
Not martyr yet.
They believe that Trump is a meal ticket. Like, as long as you support Trump, people will hire you.
Yes, that seems true.
I think it's that simple.
Okay, I'll buy it.
Why shouldn't we capitalize and make money off of Juneteenth? Or Trump, or anything else. We make money off of anything. That's what we do here in this country.
Look no further than Lev Parnas. There.
Right. Trump's behavior obviously speaks to his own character, but Trump's behavior has also proved to be a test of the character of others. Again, the whole article is emphasizing the people around him, which I think is great because that doesn't happen often enough.
Okay.
Republican politicians and voters, the GOP establishment, and the evangelical movement. It's proved to be a test of character for those who claim to be constitutional conservatives, family values advocates, ethicists, public intellectuals, for right-wing commentators and party strategists. You name it, if they're still on the Trump ship, they're horrible people with no values at all. And so, call them out. It's about time you did.
We thought we had met people like that before, but I will remind everybody that there's a conclusion I reached at the end of last week about the Cheney family political dynasty, founded on the premise that Watergate ought to be relitigated, and it really was true that if the president does it, that means it's not illegal, and then finally toppled and destroyed for reversing their field and arguing that no, in fact, it is illegal even if the president does it, and then ousted from politics. Yeah,
they admit.
Yeah, and it was terrific, and it ended their political dynasty.
So it had a happy ending.
So right,
it was like a win-win.
First
of all, we were wrong on the merits, and secondly, it ended our careers. So, what's the hate?
I don't know. There's not much for me to complain about there, except that I thought it might happen to more people.
It should, and it will.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
And now here we are, 8 summers, he writes, after Trump announced his first bid for the presidency. We find him facing 71 felony counts with 30 points above his nearest GOP rival, having transformed the Republican Party in his own image in ways that exceed even what Ronald Reagan did. And that's the thing. There are fewer Republicans, but those that are 2/3 rabid, at least 1/3 rabid. And the other 2/3 are just, it's my team, so I'm going to do it. And yet, who else is there? Again, I was reminded by somebody about Peggy Newman's great line about Ron DeSantis.
Oh.
Being the kind of guy that would unplug your ventilator in order to charge your cell phone. I mean, that is just so perfect. That is exactly who he is.
Yes. Okay. I will agree.
No, Peggy Newman may not be your favorite, but she can write, and she nailed that one.
Yeah, right, sure. We'll take it where we can get it.
So, the point being that what's left of the Republican Party is moral wreckage. And the moral wreckage, he writes, of Donald Trump's presidency and post-presidency was predictable and inevitable. The reason? Trump's moral depravity, which touches every area of his life, private and public, has long been in public view, undisguised and impossible to miss, especially to New Yorkers who knew him from way back then.
I'll say.
Right. Other shady and unethical individuals have served in the White House, Richard Nixon, Warren Harding.
Yeah.
But Trump's full spectrum corruption puts him in a category all his own. His degeneracy is unmatched in American presidential history and unsurpassed in American political history. And I got to say, having grown up in the Nixon era, Trump's worse.
Yeah, I think most people would agree. No one is around anymore, I think, who grew up in the Harding era, but that's a good point. Don't forget him. It's easy to forget. It took me a second. Harding, really? What a call. Oh, yeah, Teapot Dome, right. Okay. I remember being taught that. But it's amazing how that goes away.
Yeah. If Trump's malice is obvious, what's behind it is more difficult to assess. In 2016, the psychologist Dan McAdams wrote a psychological portrait of Trump for The Atlantic, which he later expanded into a book. McAdams describes Trump as psychologically singular, a man who lacks an inner story to provide his life with temporal continuity of purpose and meaning. He is the episodic man, living and fighting in the moment. And the moment is free of ethical considerations and ethical constraints.
Yes. That does.
In other words, you don't even have to care about what the consequences are of your action. What only matters is right now. Did I win that soundbite?
Right.
John McCain's a loser. People, look at me. What are the implications of that? Not my problem. I want you to look at me right now. I want your attention.
That's it. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Trump is like the alpha chimp who's always playing the short game, a brute force game to win at all costs. Trump himself said years ago, man is the most vicious of all animals, and life is a series of battles ending in victory or defeat.
All right.
Well, whatever the precise nature of Trump's psychological pathologies, we can see for ourselves how they manifest: extreme narcissism, lack of empathy, feelings of persecution, grandiosity, deceitfulness, impulsivity, shamelessness, remorselessness, and rage, a compulsive desire for attention, an obsessive need to dominate others, an eagerness to shatter social norms, and the belief that rules that apply to others don't apply to him. That's a pretty good summary. And that, of course, encapsulates for you why it's so important that Maggie Haberman sum up how Trump really feels about boxes.
Ay, that's the worst. That's right. That reminds me now. Yeah, the whole weekend was about, that was her conclusion. Trump loves boxes. That's the problem. He just likes boxes too much. Which,
yeah, I prefer Peter Winter's description of it.
Oh.
But it gives you an idea of the shallowness of the Haberman-style coverage.
That was
where all of her reporter friends say, "Oh, she has so much insight. She has insight. Nobody has insight like her. She's like Pulitzer Prize material, and you guys ought to just lay off her." And then you read Winter, who's getting to the heart of the matter, and you read Haberman, and you go, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, I don't know. That one was a big step back. There are things that she does, that she reports, that are excellent from time to time.
I can't recall any off the top of my head, but I suppose that's true.
I'm saying that in case. But yeah, the boxes thing. I mean, really, honestly, last night it was just striking me. I'm like, I haven't seen anything this dumb since The Jerk. You know, he hates cans. You know, the crazed gunman.
It was a great article, a source close to Jared Kushner said.
Oh, yeah, right. Friends are privately appalled. But, yeah, that was the most amazing thing. Like, in case anybody needs a clarification, Trump doesn't love boxes. Trump loves crime. You've seen Trump commit crime and be associated with crime far more often and for far longer than he's ever been associated with boxes. Boxes are where he puts the proceeds of his crimes. He doesn't love boxes. He loves what he's stolen and put in them. And even when he didn't steal the stuff, yes, he was a hoarder, but yeah.
Right, it's not about the container, it's about the stuff.
That's
if you miss that basic point.
I mean, Trump loves bronzer.
That's the whole point of what's going on here.
Yes, and I'm afraid that they have. And I'm afraid that we lose you after this break, but we'd love to catch up with you again on Wednesday. Thank you.
I'll be back, I promise.
Okay.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Okay, well, thanks to Greg for soldiering on through a segment. His voice does sound better, but yeah, apparently, every 5 seconds or so he has to quick hit the mute button. So we wish him further speedy recovery. At least he's feeling well. That's the good news. And he's collecting the stories. You can't argue with that. Can you argue with that? I'm trying to think. There's usually a way to argue with everything, but we won't argue with that. That's the real point. Okay, so yeah, Trump loves boxes. That was a real story by Maggie Haberman, and I think she was trying to make. There was a point in there somewhere. Trump's a hoarder, and he hoards things, and then occasionally he has his employees put them in boxes, but only occasionally. You may remember. All right. So he's a hoarder of those mementos and magazine clips and, of course, magazine covers. If he's on a magazine cover, he has it framed and puts it up on the wall in the house or in one of his clubs. And if he's not on a magazine cover, he pays someone someone will do it for free, fakes a magazine cover and sends it to him as a souvenir, and then he frames that and puts it on the wall. So he doesn't even have to be on the cover of a magazine in order to frame up a mocked up cover of himself. But yes, he's a hoarder. That's true. And you know that maybe it never registered with you, but now that everybody's writing that he loves boxes, you're probably thinking about it. But you may have seen pictures of him during the 2016 campaign in particular, when they took occasional photos of him in his office in Trump Tower, whether he was eating a taco bowl for Cinco de Mayo from the Trump Grill or whatever else, any number of pictures. And the pictures were always very revealing because people would take them and examine them and zoom in on them because he had so much crap on his desk, piles and piles of papers and magazines. And now you're probably remembering, oh yeah, I did see he did have an awful lot of stuff piled up around there. And I guess eventually he'll have, employees come through. And I don't know, maybe he probably doesn't ask them to do it, but they box stuff up because, maybe he knocks over a pile or something while he's on his desk reaching out to shake someone's hand because they're there to bribe him or tell him he's amazing or something. Knock something over, and employees will clean it up and put it in boxes. But then apparently he wants all the boxes left in certain places and undisturbed because his mind, to the extent that it works at all, he probably thinks this is like the sign of a brilliant mind, like the amazing recall that he has, a photographic memory. I mean, I can understand it. I have, I guess, some of the same issue, like not everything is organized around here, but if there's a pile of papers on my desk, and there's always a pile of papers on my desk, I have a pretty good idea of what's in that pile and where in the pile it rests, although I have less idea as like an archaeologist or a paleontologist. As you get further down the layers, it's a little more mysterious what might still be hiding in there. But he knows which boxes have what, more or less, and what things are in there with this item or that item, and so he gets upset when people change them. But he's always had that hoarding instinct. But the boxes are just, I think, have always been secondary. Anyway, I mean, have you seen this article? Did you see this thing over the weekend? If you didn't, perhaps you'll be amazed. But it is right here in the New York Times. And the usual team that does the usual, pretty good reporting, even if not excellent. Maggie Haberman, Alan Feuer, and Michael Schmidt. I mean, actually, two of the three names, on a lot of top, I hate so-and-so at the New York Times lists for people, particularly listeners of the show. So, okay, so take it with a grain of salt. But here's the headline. At the heart of the documents case, Trump's attachment to his boxes. And again, I have to emphasize, it's not the boxes per se, it's what's in the boxes, right? Trump loves crime. The proceeds of his crimes are in the boxes, and he likes the boxes. And even if he gets things that, he gains them through subterfuge, but not crime, or simply subscribing to that newspaper and then keeping clippings from it. Again, it's still not the boxes, it's what's in them. So it does seem a little weird, and they could have shorthanded this. I understand that boxes are a weird feature of this whole scheme, but you could just say he's a hoarder, right? I mean, people are inexplicably, but somehow interested in hoarders. There's a TV show about hoarders. There's no TV show about people who like boxes. And he's a reality TV star, per se. I guess he probably could have convinced somebody to do another show about the boxes if even he thought the boxes were important, which he does not. So, I don't know. And I had said, like I said to Greg, it's the dumbest thing since The Jerk, when the, crazed gunman is shooting at Navin Johnson and missing, and the bullets are piercing the oil cans at the gas station where he is. And he hates cans. Oh my God. Well, anyway, that's something that's missing too. by the way. When was the last time you saw a display of oil cans at the gas station? They don't do that anymore, right? They don't change your oil at the gas station for the most part. Certainly not part of your normal service. You got to go to Jiffy Lube or something like that. And they probably don't do it out of cans. They just have these giant tanks. I hadn't thought of that until just now. Anyway, the boxes. The former president, the subheader says, has long stowed papers and odds and ends in cartons that he liked to keep close. His aides have called it the, quote, beautiful mind material. And I assume that most people actually got the reference, but I don't know. And I don't know whether Trump gets the reference. I don't know whether he ever saw the movie A Beautiful Mind, but the aides here are talking about his hopeless hoarding and how disorganized and crazy looking these collections of things are, and how he sees connections between things that don't exist because he's mentally ill. And here I mean Donald Trump, not the subject of the movie, but that was true too. Anyway, so here's the rundown. During President Donald J. Trump's years in the White House, his aides began to refer to the boxes full of papers and odds and ends he carted around with him almost everywhere as the beautiful mind material. It was a reference to the title of a book and movie depicting the life of John F. Nash Jr., the mathematician with schizophrenia, who was played in a film by Russell Crowe, who covered his office with newspaper clippings, believing they held a Russian code he needed to crack. And in a way, that's pretty similar too. Anyhow, the phrase had a specific connotation. The aides employed it to capture a type of organized chaos that Mr. Trump insisted on. The collection and transportation of a blizzard of newspapers and official documents that he kept close and that seemed to give him a sense of security. And here, that's the most interesting aspect of anything, not the boxes per se, but of the weird psychological profile that emerges from this, not just of a hoarder, but of somebody who is he's in an extraordinarily important position and really needs to be mentally stable and just isn't. And his security blanket is carting around boxes of papers that he shouldn't have, mixed in with papers that nobody gives a crap whether he has or not. Anyway, one former White House official who was granted anonymity, of course, said while the materials were disorganized, Trump would notice if somebody had rifled through them or they were not arranged in a particular way. It was, the person said, how his mind worked. Again, there were some other things happening about his mind that they haven't discussed yet. The contents of those boxes and Trump's insistence on hanging on to them are now at the heart of a 38-count indictment against former president and his personal aide, Walt Nauta. Prosecutors have accused Trump of obstructing their investigation into his possession of classified material after leaving office and putting national security secrets at risk. His intense desire to keep the materials comes through in a text message cited in the indictment about the possibility of the boxes being moved after they were shipped to Mar-a-Lago, when one employee asked another if some could be moved to storage. The second employee, identified by multiple people as Trump's former assistant, Molly Michael, who I think was, is that the one conducting the interview with Mark Meadows at Bedminster that ended up also in this indictment? Molly Michael replied, "Whoa," which she spells W-O-A-H, which is an unusual and different spelling, although I do see a lot of people using that these days. I always favored the W-H-O-A spelling, but there you have it. Whoa! Okay, so POTUS, which he isn't, specifically asked Walt for those boxes to be in the business center because they are his, quote, papers. At another point, she used the phrase, the beautiful mind paper boxes, in a text message. The indictment said it's really rather dismissive of your boss, but hey, you're right. He is a doofus and a hoarder. Trump's attachment to the contents of the boxes, at least she says that, has now left him in serious legal peril, but it appears to be in keeping with a long pattern of behavior. Trump has always hung on to news clippings, documents, and other mementos, according to more than half a dozen people who've worked for him over the years, including before his presidency. His office at Trump Tower in New York a corner space on the 26th floor, had a desk that was often piled high with papers. That's what we were discussing before. And those are the sorts of photos that we would zoom in and see what he was keeping, and you could see what was on his desk. You could see what was in his desk drawer, where he kept the special imported Sudafed that he's addicted to. He kept keepsakes for decades, returning to the article, including a series of letters written to him by famous people more than 30 years ago, which he later published as a book that he sells for nearly $100 a copy. Any of the writers of the letters get any money? You can be assured that they do not. Starting in the early months of his administration, Trump began using cardboard boxes to bring papers and documents from the West Wing up to the residence at the end of the day. In the White House, according to two people familiar with the practice, Trump was generally able to identify what was in the boxes most immediately around him. Cookies, blankie, bunny, man, woman, person, TV, camera is in that one. One of the people said he was, quote, meticulous in putting things in specific boxes, notwithstanding a picture released by the Justice Department showing a classified document spilled on the floor of a storage room at Mar-a-Lago. Shortly after John F. Kelly took over as Trump's chief of staff in July of 2017, Kelly and other aides grew concerned that some documents were likely presidential records and might go missing if they were kept in the residence. Oh, wow. They impressed upon Trump that the papers had to be tracked, but he was not especially interested, the people said. Aides started examining the boxes to check for presidential records, but Trump still found ways to bring items to the residence, and the boxes began to multiply. He could point to specific boxes that he wanted to take with him on Air Force One when he was traveling, and decline to take others, appearing aware of the contents inside the boxes he chose, both officials said. And even that is a supposition at best, right? Wow, he could identify boxes. Really? Wow, they're the cubicle items made of cardboard that are very close by here, and they, I can recognize that in space. Yeah, well, and I like that, I want to take this one and this one and this one, but not that one and not that one. Okay, and wow, his mind is so organized, he knows which ones he wants with him for specific purposes. Or he's a raving lunatic, and he's just like, this one, and this one fits in my shopping cart. And the rest of them, I don't care. And he may have no idea what's in them. It's just, I think at this point, the aides are just imposing this idea of order and a, scattered physically, but mentally he's organized. He knows exactly what he's taking with him. But he may have zero idea. And he's not doing anything with it. He's certainly not reading anything in the boxes either. So I don't really know whether he was really that organized. Same was true when Trump left the White House, the article continues. He knew the contents of the boxes around him, which isn't going to help him in court because, if you want that to be the argument, go ahead, I guess. Did you know you were taking classified material? Yes, I did. I know all the contents of all the boxes. All right, well, you're convicted then. You're really better off saying, I'm a moron. I didn't know what was in those boxes. Some aides would periodically encourage him to condense the number he had in his immediate vicinity. Another person familiar with Trump's habits said that when one box filled up, aides over the past 2 years would take it away and store it, bringing him a new one. That's what you would sort of expect. Anyway, the charging document includes photos detailing just how many dozens of those cardboard boxes Trump had amassed. They are piled on stage at Mar-a-Lago, stuffed into a storage room, even stacked in a bathroom, with some behind a shower curtain. At his club in Bedminster, New Jersey, on Tuesday night, hours after he was arraigned in a Miami courtroom, Trump insisted to several hundred supporters that the boxes contained newspapers, press clippings, and thousands of White House pictures, as well as clothing, memorabilia, and much, much more. Act now, and we'll send you a grab bag of whatever's in there. I hadn't had a chance to go through all the boxes, Trump said. It's a long, tedious job. Takes a long time, which I was prepared to do, but I have a very busy life. That claim that the boxes contained mostly personal items like clothing and that Mr. Trump was not aware of exactly what they held is one that he had made to his own advisors toward the second half of 2021. Trump's lawyers included a similar argument in a letter sent to Congress in April, claiming that Trump had little to do with how the documents were packed and shipped to Florida after he left office. In the letter, the lawyers claimed that institutional processes rather than intentional decisions by Mr. Trump resulted in classified material leaving the White House. The White House staff simply swept all documents from the president's desk and other areas into boxes where they have resided ever since, the letter said. Oh, by the way, I don't know whether this changed over his years in the White House. I can't recall. But I do have a distinct memory of having seen his desk in the early days, in particular, at the White House, where I noticed the starkness of the desk. They kept it mostly bare with the exception of like an old-timey looking telephone. And for the most part, throughout the first couple of years of him in the White House, whenever you saw pictures being taken in the Oval Office, the desk is clear. And I wondered whether somebody was taking care of that, or they just wanted. He thought maybe it looked unpresidential in some way to have those stacks of papers. So I'm not certain whether that practice continued all the way through the 4 years at the White House, but it also gives lie to the idea of, well, we just swept all those papers off of his desk and into boxes. Well, I don't know what you swept them off of, but it wasn't his desk, so I'm not so sure about that. And anyway, it won't make any difference because even if you swept all that stuff into boxes, just like you said, when the National Archives says give it back, if you don't, you have a problem. And he didn't, so he has a problem. But they're already in boxes, and you know how I feel about boxes, according to Maggie Haberman. They should have asked for the boxes back, and then we'd see how much he liked boxes. According to prosecutors, the notion that Mr. Trump was simply too busy to know all that he had is undercut by the facts. Well, probably so. One fact being, it doesn't matter whether you knew you had it or not. Once we told you you had it, you had to give it back, and you didn't do it. But let's see where Maggie Haberman et al. Go with this. As early as January 2021, as Trump was preparing to leave office after efforts to thwart the transfer of power to Joe Biden, he and his White House staff members, including Nauta, packed materials into boxes. The indictment said Trump was personally involved in this process. Okay. On 2 occasions after he left office, once in late 2021 as he was reluctantly responding to demands from the National Archives to return the material he had taken from the White House, and then later after a grand jury subpoena demanding the return of any classified documents still in his possession, or rather, any documents marked classified, or with classification markings on them, to be clear. Trump was brought a number of boxes to review, indicating that he was aware of their contents. Trump repeatedly told advisors the boxes of documents were, quote, mine, according to several people familiar with his remarks. Well, the boxes are yours. That's true. But that's the extent of the article also. I mean, it was just kind of a dumb article to start with. And now we can tell you it's dumb all the way to the end. So, I don't know. I mean, I get the idea. He's a hoarder. Boxes are the place that I mean, where else would you put things like that? You could just have stacks of paper. Most people put them in boxes. I just don't think there's anything magical about the boxes. And the focus on the boxes, it's as dumb as focusing on the cans when the guy is shooting at you. It's really, there's another issue at hand here. It's the stuff that's inside. And, you ought to recognize that. But for some reason, I don't know. They just don't. That's crazy. Now, what the hell else were we going to do? Well, there's an awful lot. Oh, yes, right. Well, let's see. First of all, I should mention that I made reference to this earlier. Trump has a new demand to make of his Republican Party, which is now totally enthralled to him. As you know, Republicans have been demanding this for quite some time. This is actually pretty interesting, just generally speaking, now that I think about what's involved here. But can I bring this up? It's a Vanity Fair article. Can I actually see is it paywalled or not? Or it comes to me maybe through Apple News, so maybe I can read the whole thing. Okay, so here's the deal. No, I need to set this up a little bit more. So as you may recall from the 2016 campaign, and not so much obviously in the 2020 campaign because this wasn't an issue, but there was the question of whether or not Republicans in 2016, if they lost the nomination, the other candidates, would they all agree to support the Republican nominee, whoever it turned out to be? And the Republican National Committee required this, and it came up during the primary debates, right? And you may recall they asked that question in the format of, raise your hand if you will support the Republican nominee, no matter who it is. And everybody on stage except Trump raised their hands. And Trump actually said, we'll have to see what happens. So he was basically saying, no, if it's not me, I don't know if I'll support the Republican nominee. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I don't know how true that really was, even in his mind at the time, but he said it, and that was important. And what's amazing is, of course, now is as the 2024 election approaches, the RNC has said that it will once again be their policy that you can't participate in the Republican National Committee events, I guess up to and including, I guess you can't really exclude people. Can you exclude them from the primaries? I don't really know what the Republican rules are on that. But they say a pledge to support the eventual nominee is a must for those running for the nomination now. And I don't know whether they'll get that promise out of Trump again. Or whether he'll decline to promise it again, and whether that will even matter. It'll be very interesting to see. If you're trying to measure how enthralled to Trump and Trumpism is the Republican Party and the Republican National Committee, consider that as a good measure, right? If they're going to insist that in order to participate in the Republican primaries, you have to promise to back the eventual nominee. Think about what that means in two different directions. One, of course, it means that the rest of the field has to pledge publicly to support someone who may be a convicted felon at that point because he's a Republican. He's not a convicted felon because he's a Republican, though that might also turn out to be true. But that, in order to be a Republican and remain a Republican in good standing, you have to be willing to back Donald Trump if he wins the nomination, even if he's on trial at the time, even if he has been convicted at the time, whatever it may be. But apparently that's not even enough for Trump. But also it should be pointed out that they will demand this, and then they'll demand it sort of, I guess, of Trump. He'll be running too. Will you support the Republican nominee, whoever it turns out to be? And he may say no again, and then they may let him run again anyway and participate in all of these things. And they'll say, well, you can't keep an former president running to regain office. He's the most important guy we got. He's the most likely front runner. In fact, we know he is the front runner. So they'll allow, it would be amazing if they required that promise from everyone else and required it of him, and he declined to give that promise, and they let him on stage, and whatever. But on the other hand, he may, and now that I think about it, he might be willing to say that he would support the Republican nominee, even if it's not him, given what he is now also demanding on top of all this. This is the subject of the Vanity Fair article from Bess Levin, who writes that there is a report, Trump literally wants every GOP presidential candidate to promise that they'll pardon him, in addition to having to pledge that you'll support the eventual Republican nominee, which he takes to mean him. They have to agree to pardon him. So I guess that's weird too. For a number of reasons, not the least of which is it admits of the possibility that he may not win the nomination. So he may end up saying, well, I'll support the nominee, whoever the person is, for the Republican Party, so long as they agree to pardon me, which one, like I said, first admits that he might not win the nomination and that still might be okay with him, so long as they agree to do this pardon thing. Two, others are pointing out very quickly, well, what would you need a pardon for? You have to admit I don't think there really is any actual requirement that anybody acknowledge guilt in order to receive a presidential pardon. That was widely perceived to be the case, but once again, that's another thing that Trump has stood on its head. So I don't know that that's ever going to be true again for anybody. But, what about that? What about the logical problem that it presents? You'd have to admit that you were guilty in order to accept a pardon for things. No, I don't think so. I don't believe that that's the case. but you would have to accept a pardon from someone else. So you'd have to back that nominee and hope that they win in order to help you get your pardon. So that might inadvertently create a very interesting situation, one that he's not used to. Losing the nomination and then supporting the nominee anyway, because if I don't support the nominee, then they won't be inclined to, either keep the promise if they make the promise or come around to the position that they ought to pardon me unless I play nice. So there's a lot happening here. Not to mention the fact that it is, as I also mentioned to Greg earlier, the embodiment of the Nixon doctrine. And here, to harken back to a long-time thread on this show, we will all turn out to have been pre-wrong about the Nixon doctrine. We have taught 2+ generations, I guess, more, I don't know, since Watergate, to laugh out loud when confronted with the notion, as Nixon put it, that, well, if the president does it, that means it's not illegal. Ha ha ha, ridiculous. That's just the symbol of hubris and overstep by the imperial presidency. It's everything that was wrong with the whole thing that fits under the rubric of the name Watergate. He's crazy. He's the only person who thinks that, et cetera, et cetera. There were some loyalists who thought that. Like I said, Dick Cheney thought that. And then at the end of the Cheney dynasty, they were convinced that they were wrong about that the whole time. But now it may turn out that they were right after all, and they changed their minds late in the game, only to find out that they were right the first time and that we were all wrong. And it really does mean that it's illegal if it's not illegal if the president does it, or even an ex-president. If Republicans make basically a part of their platform that when Republican presidents commit crimes, even up to and including, treason and espionage and what have you, that, trauma to the nation if we punish them for that. So we're gonna pardon them. That means essentially, before I even read the thing, and actually I'll have to wait because the break is coming up. I've talked my way to the break again, but this is a teaser for what's coming up after. But maybe this is the more important material than the story itself anyway, even though the story will help illustrate it and clarify it. But it means that the Republican platform is that Republicans can't commit crimes in the presidency no matter what they do. But even more to the point there, I guess, is that these things are in fact legal from now on, and but only for Republicans, and that the 2024 presidential election will be straight up a ballot question, a proposal to pardon Trump. If you vote Republican, you are for pardoning Trump, and everybody else has to vote elsewise. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So you want to hear the Vanity Fair article? Trump literally wants every GOP presidential candidate to promise that they'll pardon him, Bess Levin says, the subheader. Meanwhile, the RNC is reportedly stipulating that any one candidate, yes, who wants to be on the debate stage this summer must vow to support the eventual 2024 nominee, which could mean backing a convicted felon. But don't worry about it, because by the end of the time, if you win, then he won't be a convicted felon anymore. Well, maybe he will be, but he'll be a pardoned convicted felon. So it's okay. And something, I don't really know what you're supposed to make of that. But in the last 3 months, it starts out this way. Donald Trump has been, and it's a bullet-pointed list here, indicted on 34 felony counts by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office over hush money deals he paid in the run-up to the 2016 election. And you might perhaps note, for the record, hush money deals that he paid to porn star to be quiet about his having had sex with her while his wife was at home with their newborn baby. Okay. I don't know why that got left out. He's also been, a bulleted point says, indicted on 37 counts by the Department of Justice for hanging on to classified documents that were not his to keep. That's a very mild way of saying it. And allegedly obstructing a federal investigation. Next point, he's been the continued subject of a separate DOJ investigation into his attempt to overturn the 2020 election, which could result in criminal charges, and the continued subject of an investigation by the district attorney's office in Fulton County, Georgia, into his attempt to overturn the election there, which could also result in criminal charges, and possibly very soon at that. I don't know why they put that in there. My guess is they might even get to the other ones before Georgia, being that they have to wait until August. Anyway, for all these reasons, the ex-president is obviously in extreme legal peril, as the DOJ's classified documents case alone could potentially send him to prison for the rest of his life. Obviously, Trump does not want that, so he's devised a plan. Demand that everyone running for president on the GOP ticket pledge to pardon him upon assuming office in the event he can't do it himself. This does bring up an interesting possibility. One, that he would accept a different Republican nominee, like we were saying. But in addition, I guess it tells us a little something. Like, the most important thing to him is that he be pardoned, and that he believes that should actually be issue number one for any Republican president, whether it's him or anyone else, is pardoning him, which is an amazing thing to do or say. But I guess it's more important to him to get that pardon even than to say, no, I'm actually the best nominee possible. I'm the best president. I'm the best whatever. He's willing to accept some other substitute and to praise and endorse them so long as they will deliver on the promise of this pardon. That's how important it is. That's how scared he is of being convicted for this stuff. Yes, Rolling Stone reports the utterly unsurprising news that a man known for speaking like a mob boss has made it clear to all 2024 presidential candidates that they must, quote, promise to pardon the Donald or else. As the outlet notes, the demand advances two goals. The first is to protect himself from legal consequences if he loses both the GOP primary and his federal court case. The second is to lay a trap for any Republican who tries to engage with it, either side with Trump and use the occasion to keep him in the campaign spotlight, or share some uncomfortable real estate on the side of Joe Biden and the Justice Department. And one person the ex-president would quite obviously like to set that trap for is his rival from Florida. If you're Ron DeSantis, you find yourself in a really tough situation, because if you blast the DOJ and you blast Jack Smith and Biden, you're essentially defending Trump and admitting Trump was right. A Republican strategist told Rolling Stone, if you condemn him, there's no lane for you running on that. And then silence is an equally bad option, because folks notice you not saying anything. A Trump spokesperson did not respond to the specific question of a pardon demand when Rolling Stone asked for a comment. They tell you helpfully here in Vanity Fair. Last month, when discussing January 6th, the Florida governor said it would be a day one priority to pardon people who were supposedly the victims of political targeting, suggesting that Trump could be one of those people, but he has not said anything about potentially pardoning the ex-president should the former guy be convicted in the documents case. By contrast, GOP candidate Vivek Ramaswamy has said every 2024 hopeful, regardless of party, should pledge to pardon Trump. That seems like maybe a no on that. For his part, former Vice President Mike Pence said in a recent interview, I just think it's premature to have any conversations about pardons right now. How about one about hanging you? Could we have that conversation? While former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley had said she would be, quote, inclined to favor a pardon. So it is 2024, in fact, a plebiscite, is that the right word for it, on whether or not to pardon Trump, and for that matter, whether or not to pardon the January 6th insurrectionists. I mean, you just really cannot allow that to happen. You just can't. I mean, we're over. if that happens. And it's odd because it's going to be, I'm sure, conducted like a standard campaign. It's certainly going to be covered like a standard campaign by the New York Times and others. Well, it's the economy, stupid, and Republicans are great for the economy. Again, all the evidence stacks up the other direction. We know this. Good for jobs? No. Good for the economy? No. Good on national defense? No. Good on anything, traditional values? No. War on drugs, if you like that sort of thing? No, not even good at that. Horrible on all counts, and on top of which it also means, fake electors are okay, insurrection is okay, overthrowing the government is okay, stealing nuclear secrets is okay. And I'm reminded when we were talking about Jared Kushner earlier in the show, Athena reminds us, don't forget, selling people visas and green cards in exchange for $500,000 investments in apartments that you've built is okay, as Kushner did himself. Lots of things. Now, all of it is just fine if you opt to treat this next election as a normal one and just say, hey, I just want a Republican in charge of the economy, man. Because reasons, or I want lower taxes, even though my taxes keep, whatever. The deficit keeps going up. Oh, I'm concerned about runaway spending. Let's just do some more of it. That too, another Republican fault. But if you actually try to decide the election on standard, normal things, realize that you're ignoring that it is a straight up or down vote on whether or not to pardon all of the highest crimes and misdemeanors imaginable. The sorts of things that the founders were pretty sure that even in this day and age, we would string people up by the neck and execute for doing. Or make them president of the United States and give them unlimited power in complete negation of the Constitution they drew up for us. But, I'm sure they would come around. Some of them could be talked into it. Anyway, in related news, the Republican National Committee has reportedly refused to amend its requirement that GOP candidates pledge to support the eventual nominee in order to qualify for this summer's debates, despite the fact that one of the candidates is now an accused criminal and could potentially be a convicted criminal in the future. And I would add here, despite the fact that this particular potentially convicted criminal who's running was most famous in the 2016 debates for refusing to comply with this very same requirement. And that if he refuses to comply with this requirement again, the RNC will not be able to find the wherewithal to exclude him from the debates. They won't. They can't. If they even try, I imagine, I don't even know where the chaos goes from here. Anyway, but that's not mentioned in here, believe it or not. According to Politico, during a call with a staffer from former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson's campaign, RNC leaders said no changes would be made and told the staffer they are, quote, not dealing with hypotheticals regarding Trump's legal future. Speaking to Politico, Hutchinson said, I'm not going to vote for him if he's a convicted felon, which most people would agree is an entirely reasonable position. I'm not going to vote for him if he's convicted of espionage, and I'm not going to vote for him if he's convicted of other serious crimes, and I'm not going to support him. Okay. I mean, that's good news for me in terms of, how do I don't know. It's not even good news in terms of how I feel about Asa Hutchinson, really. But it's good to hear that happens, but it's only going to end up doing what? Getting him probably banned from the debates, and will mean that he is not anywhere close to being the nominee, and so it doesn't mean anything in terms of changes in the party. It means that the party's going to do everything they can to purge that sort of change where they can identify it. So, I don't know. I find that really remarkable, and also equally remarkable that they don't actually stop and say, will Donald Trump live by this pledge? Because he wouldn't in 2016, but maybe he will now, because again, it's more important to him to get pardoned than to get elected. He never really wanted the job in the first place, and whatever. So now that's that. Okay, let's see. Other things to read and share. What was this? I can't remember why I put this aside. But I will be quickly reminded as we start to read it. That will cure it all. This highly recommended diary from Daily Kos by D'Artagnan, who, as I recall, made an excellent point. Let us now discover together, rediscover in my case, what that point was. The New York Times makes an easy target, but this is absolutely appalling, and I probably clicked on it thinking, this is about the stupid box article, but I don't think it was. It was instead, well, as follows. As many news outlets have reported, the Republican-led House of Representatives introduced a resolution last week attempting to, totally different story, censure and fine Democratic Representative Adam Schiff for, among other things, his efforts, statements, and actions to investigate and confirm collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian Federation regarding the 2016 election. Wow. We hadn't followed the story, really. I had seen it, but the story came to me in a way that made me less interested in it, actually, which is to say, I kept getting emails from Adam Schiff's campaign saying that they were going to be doing this, and it was in the context of, and then you should donate to my campaign, which, no more or less shameless than any other fundraising and fundraising email that I get. Something like that happens to, and you point it out and say, if you want to stand up to this kind of crap, you might as well pitch in a few bucks. But really, honestly, this was rather amazing. Okay, so because realize what they're saying here is that these allegations of collusion were out there and made, and then he gave life to it by attempting to strong-arm the Ukrainian government into either revealing, if they had any, or making up, if they didn't, evidence against, Hunter Biden, and if they could, then against Joe Biden directly, so that they could claim that he was scandal-ridden and therefore unfit for office, even though no one seemed to think twice about saying, well, if we are arguing that scandal-ridden people are unfit for office, what does that mean about us? And then they said, we're Gimitarians. It doesn't matter. Just so long as the other guy is scandal-ridden, we can whatabout our way into the White House again. So he ended up getting impeached for it. And so the Republicans are so mad about that they have said, all right, a member of Congress who investigates serious allegations against the current president and then, after convincing the House of Representatives that they're substantive enough that they ought to report out articles of impeachment, comes to the Senate, tries the case, and for pretty obvious political reasons, end up losing on the question of conviction because, of course, it requires a 2/3 vote of the Senate. But carrying that duty out will get you censured and fined by the party of the president should they be awarded control of the House of Representatives at any point. They would then use the prerogative of the Constitution to discipline its own members to do this. And they doubtless think that this is in part payback for things like keeping Murdery Trader off of her committee assignments, and Paul Gosar being ejected from his committee assignments for all sorts of dangerous and anti-Semitic statements made on the floor, made in public, support of January 6th, etc. That wasn't involved in it, of course, until later. But anyway, I think that they think this is perhaps, once again, one of their stupid calls for an eye for an eye. But it's, of course, that much more troublesome. This is the statements that were made by Gosar and Murdery Trader and others were in no way connected to official duties, really, except that, sometimes they actually made these remarks on the floor, and that's troublesome all by itself. You can't get in any legal jeopardy for that, thanks to the Constitution, but the House itself can hold you accountable. But this is an interesting thing. This takes it a step further. It's, you're the lower half of your body for an eye sort of thing. that now being an impeachment manager means, against a president of our party, means we will not just throw you off of your committees, but censure and fine you as well. This is a real dangerous precedent. And so dangerous that, in fact, even the requisite number of Republicans recognized it and said, this will come back to haunt us if we go ahead and do this. And so guess what happened? As it turns out, the vote was held, and it failed 225 to 196, with several Republicans crossing the aisle to vote against their own party. Now, here's some interesting observations that D'Artagnan makes. 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans voted present in connection with the failed resolution. With those facts in mind, please read this article by the New York Times Capitol reporter Karen. It's K-I-R-O-U-N. Is it Karun by any chance, or just is it just as Karun Demirjian? So maybe, I don't know. I'm not certain about the pronunciation of first or last names. But after reading the introductory facts, Demirjian writes the following. The vote was 225 to 196 to table, or kill, sort of, a resolution by Representative Anna Paulina Luna, one of the looniest, not coincidental, the craziest Republicans out there. Doesn't get enough attention for being crazy. But anyway, she's simply described here as a Florida Republican who has allied herself closely with the former president. 20 Republicans joined Democrats in voting to sideline it, with another 2 GOP lawmakers voting present to avoid registering a position. In a surprise, 5 Democrats also voted present. Now, keep that in mind, because there's something that D'Artagnan wants to address with that. Now, there's more from the article. While the measure, which accused Mr. Schiff of willfully lying for political gain, was highly partisan, it raised complicated questions about accountability and revenge. Mr. Schiff's claims that there was ample evidence that Trump colluded with Russia were undermined by the conclusions of the special counsel, Robert S. Mueller III, who wrote in his report that his investigation, quote, did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, unquote. Republicans have wielded that determination to accuse Mr. Schiff of lying. Now, there are 2 errors here, as D'Artagnan reports. The first is the assertion that it was a, quote, surprise that 5 Democrats also voted present. The clear and unmistakable implication from Demirjian's article is that Schiff did not have the full support of his caucus in opposing the resolution. That's quite wrong, and the reason why it is wrong is explained below. But the language bolded in the subsequent paragraph is far more troubling. That would be the part about them saying that Schiff's claims that there were ample evidence against Trump were undermined by the conclusions of the Mueller report. Well, you may remember things differently, right? Demirjian states as a fact, not an opinion, not a viewpoint, but as a fact, that Schiff's claims were undermined by the conclusions of special counsel Mueller. The statement is further emphasized by Demirjian in her sentence stating Republicans have wielded that determination to accuse Mr. Schiff of lying. Before we get to the substance of the paragraph by Demirjian, take a look at the following analysis piece on the very same subject written by Steve Bannon for MSNBC. Bannon writes, whether Republicans want to hear this or not, the seriousness of Trump's Russia scandal has not been discredited. And when Schiff said there was ample evidence connecting the former president's political operation and his Russian benefactors, he was correct. In fact, a Senate Intelligence Committee's report, written in part by the panel's then Republican majority, at one point literally described, quote, a direct tie between senior Trump campaign officials and the Russian intelligence services, unquote. Bannon also addressed the fact that 5 Democrats voted present, but unlike Demirjian, he actually explains why they voted the way they did. I thought you might all find this interesting. If you look at the roll call, you'll note that the 5 House Democrats who voted present on Wednesday, well, there's a reason for it. They did vote present, but that's not because they're Schiff critics. Those 5 members serve on the House Ethics Committee. And as a Politico report noted, Democratic ethics panel members generally vote present on any ethics matters that come before the House. Very interesting. Now, there would, of course, be just as many Republicans on the Ethics Committee as well, but only 2 present votes from them. But they do note that I guess I don't know whether it's a Democratic caucus rule or just standard practice, and maybe it doesn't exist on the Republican side, and that wouldn't surprise me. But I don't know. We should look at the roll call and see whether the 2 Republicans who voted present are themselves also on the Ethics Committee or whether there's some other reasoning behind it. But that was interesting. Something that probably should have been noted and shouldn't have included the present votes as if it meant that the Democrats didn't stand foursquare behind Schiff on this. So let's be clear. It was no surprise that 5 Democrats voted present. Contrary to the implication in Demirjian's New York Times piece, it was simply the fact that those Democrats were following protocol as members of the Ethics Committee. But anyone following Demirjian's reporting would have instantly and reasonably concluded that 5 Democrats believed somehow that Schiff may have been culpable and deserving of censure. That's not just sloppy reporting on Demirjian's part, it's tantamount to misinformation. But let's presume it was unintentional and that Demirjian was simply negligent in failing to determine why those 5 Democrats voted in that fashion. What's neither unintentional nor negligent is her assertion as a matter of fact that Schiff's claims were undermined by the Mueller report and its conclusions. That is, at best, a matter of serious dispute and at worst, a complete mischaracterization. But in either case, it is an opinion and not a fact. As Benin explains, whether Republicans want to hear this or not, the seriousness of Trump's Russia scandal has not been discredited, and when Schiff said there was ample evidence connecting the former president's political operation to his Russian benefactors, he was correct. We actually read this already. I don't know, I needed to be quoted a second time, but, maybe in the drafting. That got away. All right. At any rate, I was going to say that at best you could argue that maybe the author is saying, Demirjian saying, that according to Bill Barr's erroneous intentionally backwards and upside down executive summary of the Mueller report, there was no connection, and the charge that there was ample evidence is wrong. But the Mueller report itself said, while we don't make any recommendation on charging him because we think that's outside of the scope of our review, the evidence is overwhelming that there's reason to charge him if you want to do that. Anyone who has actually read the Mueller report, D'Artagnan continues here, and the Senate Intelligence Committee report describing Russia's efforts to influence the 2016 election will come away with the clear understanding that there existed multiple and numerous knowing avenues of communication between the Trump campaign and the Russian intelligence services regarding the 2016 election, specifically Russia's intention and efforts to influence the outcome. As Benin has previously written, as regular readers know, he says, investigations from Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team and the GOP-led Senate Intelligence Committee documented the extent to which Trump and his team welcomed, received, and benefited from Russian campaign assistance. They also obstructed the investigation into this assistance by some measures 10 times. The evidence also showed there was coordination and high-level connections between Trump's political operation and those responsible for the attack on our elections. The Senate Intelligence Committee's report at one point literally described a direct tie between senior Trump campaign officials and the Russian intelligence services. Following Trump's lead, Republicans have widely branded the Mueller investigation, and by implication, the Republicans' own Senate investigation, a, quote, hoax, implying that the entire effort was utterly groundless and a political smear. They have to do this because the implications otherwise are quite damning. Trump, in fact, conspired with known Russian sources to engineer the election's outcome. That would make Donald Trump a traitor in the eyes of most Americans. But Repetition of that lie has already obtained its desired result. The Republican rank and file refused to believe what is actually spelled out in detail both in the Mueller report and the Senate investigation. What the New York Times' Capitol reporter did here was feed directly into that narrative, namely that Schiff has been undermined by the Mueller report. And to add insult to injury, Demirjian falsely implies that 5 Democrats may also have felt that he was undermined by voting present on the GOP resolution to censure him. But as Brennan and many other investigative reporters have shown, Schiff wasn't undermined at all. He was validated. For example, from Ryan Goodman, writing for Just Security, we read his stuff every once in a while, the redacted Mueller report documents a series of activities that show strong evidence of collusion, or more precisely, it provides significant evidence that Trump campaign associates coordinated with, cooperated with, encouraged, or gave support to the Russia/WikiLeaks election interference activities. In short, there was plenty of evidence of collusion. Mueller, however, was looking for crimes provable beyond a reasonable doubt, as Mueller himself stated, and as reported by Philip Bump for the Washington Post at the time. We did not address collusion, which is not a legal term. Rather, we focused on whether the evidence was sufficient to charge any member of the campaign with taking part in a criminal conspiracy. It was not. Nor, pursuant to DOJ policy, was charging Trump with criminal liability even considered by Mueller. Based on Justice Department policy and principles of fairness, we decided we would not make a determination as to whether the president committed a crime. That was our decision then, and it remains our decision today. For example, as Goodman notes, we don't know what the special counsel's office or FBI have addressed, for example, with respect to whether Trump associates engaged in reciprocal efforts with Russian agents without entering a criminal agreement to do so, whether Americans have been witting or unwitting Russian assets, and what leverage or influence Moscow may have over particular individuals. Still a mystery. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, I'm gathering up a couple more stories that have appeared in email this morning. Okay, let's see. A couple of things that might be of some interest. We'll see if we can get to them. That brings us almost to the end of the Vanity Fair article, and really it's just a summation from that point on. But I think we've got the gist of it, not the Vanity Fair article, but rather the D'Artagnan diary about this. We got through Ryan Goodman's comments about these things, but that basically, nowhere in Demirjian's reporting is any acknowledgement of the fact that the reports actually said there was ample evidence and that Schiff was actually right about that, nor any mention of the equally damning Senate report at all. If the implications of Trump's treachery with Russian intelligence weren't so grave, this might be forgivable, but they are, and this isn't. This is worse than lazy journalism. It's misinformation with serious national implications. The only question is whether it's a product of sheer incompetence or biased intent. So we'll leave it up to you to decide, I guess. And it's not that important that you actually decide, just that you recognize what's going on and can tell others when and if you discuss it with them. All right. A couple of other stories that have been socked away for various reasons. Let's see. Among them are some that are very important. Let me see. I got to open up some of these that are social media related. Oh, yes, this one. Oh, this is a good point, too. Somebody making an excellent point based off of a story in The Hill reporting on work done at the New York Times. Let me see if we can follow the chain here to the Times article. The Times article is Captured, Killed, or Compromised. CIA admits to losing dozens of informants. But this is not a new story. It's actually an old story. It just has new implications. This is an October 2021 story by the New York Times. And is the Hill story... Yeah, for whatever reason, the person making the point grabbed something from The Hill. They probably Googled the story. They remembered it, and The Hill's hit came up first. But it was the New York Times' own reporting. Counterintelligence officials said in a top-secret cable to all stations and bases around the world that too many of the people it recruits from other countries to spy for the U.S. are being lost. Julian Barnes and Adam Goldman reported this. But just to add perhaps a little more color, another paragraph or two of what's going on here. The top American counterintelligence officials warned every CIA station and base around the world about this last week. This was back in October of 2021. The message in an unusual top-secret cable said that the CIA's Counterintelligence Mission Center had looked at dozens of cases in the last several years involving foreign informants who had been killed, arrested, or most likely compromised. Although brief, the cable laid out the specific number of agents executed by rival intelligence agencies, a closely held detail that counterintelligence officials typically do not share in such cables, but you can see what's going on here. The cable highlighted the struggle the spy agency is having as it works to recruit spies around the world in difficult operating environments. In recent years, adversarial intelligence services in countries such as Russia, China, Iran, and Pakistan have been hunting down the CIA's sources and in some cases turning them into double agents. Acknowledging that recruiting spies is a high-risk business, the cable raised issues that have plagued the agency in recent years, including poor tradecraft, being too trusting of sources, underestimating foreign intelligence agencies, and moving too quickly to recruit informants while not paying enough attention to potential counterintelligence risks, a problem the cable called placing mission over security. But I would imagine that the top concern is, hey, a lot of our spies and informants are being found out and arrested, executed, or in some cases turned into double agents. Now, again, note the time. It is October of 2021 when this is being reported. And I guess the cable had gone out the last week. So, yeah, late September to early October 2021. Now, the point is made here on the Bird site by John Oberlin, just I don't know, let's see, what's this guy's high follower count kind of person, but no description in his bio that he's not obsessed with credentials, so they're not listed here. But an excellent point nonetheless. Whether he has credentials or not, I mean, you don't have to have credentials to observe this. Do the math, he says. Now, I don't know how much math has to do with it, but do the reading. The CIA started losing agents, assets, and spies around the world as soon, or more or less, as Trump bitterly left the White House with hundreds of highly classified national security documents. Coincidence? Again, he says, do the math. I'm not certain that there's any math involved here. So he's not a math teacher. That's not among his credentials. But we get the point of the line, right? And let's see, somebody else jumps in and says, this article shook me, and they're pointing to the New York Times article. Also, only 4 months after that Helsinki or Helsinki fiasco with Trump and Putin in July of 2018, Paul Whelan was arrested on espionage charges in Russia. I am certain Trump either sold out or set up Whelan. I'm not so sure. I don't know that story all that well, but it could be kind of crazy out there. I don't know. Now, there are counter accusations made in the comments beneath, of course, but somebody who obviously has a long-running feud with Oberlin saying that, well, this started under Obama. And I guess there's a quote from one or another of the articles. And it wouldn't surprise me if it did start under Obama, but it also wouldn't surprise me terribly if it had accelerated. It must have accelerated to some unacceptable level such that the cable was sent out in October of 2021. And remember, the characterization of the cable is that the problem of late has grown unexpectedly large. And of course, remember also, as I'm sure Athena wants us to point back to Kushner again, that was widely suspected, or it was widely suspected that Kushner revealed to Mr. Bonesaw, Mohammed bin Salman, the identities of members of the Saud royal family who opposed his taking over and leadership in Saudish Arabia, and they were all rather methodically rounded up and put away in various places, though some of them were Ritz-Carlton hotels, but apparently the stay was not among the most pleasant. It's not the best breakfast they ever ate, and they wanted their money back. So I thought that was an interesting point, though, that around October of 2021, before we knew, not before the National Archives and Records Administration knew, but before the rest of us knew how much he had stolen and how important the stuff was and how many sources could have been compromised, it turns out that the CIA grew alarmed at the sudden increase in the number of sources and spies they were losing along the way. So something to keep in mind, to say the very least about it. Okay, let's see. Other things to share with you at the moment. Other Hill stories that actually I discovered in this morning's email. Let's take a look at one or two of them, get the pop-ups out of the way. First of all, just to bring us back to ground reality and prepare us for discussions with Joan perhaps tomorrow, GOP leaders face down conservative threats to paralyze the House again, according to Mike Lillis and Michael Schnell, who report thus. House GOP leaders returned to Washington this week, struggling to quell the conservative angst that's threatening to derail their legislative agenda heading into the summer's major policy fights with President Biden. 11 conservatives shut down all floor action for almost a week earlier in the month to protest Speaker Kevin McCarthy's handling of the debt ceiling talks. That forced the Speaker to host a string of closed-door meetings last week with hardliners who want concrete assurances he'll demand deeper spending cuts in the coming fight over government funding. While those detractors allowed floor votes to resume during the course of those talks, there was little sign of progress by week's end when the hardliners left Washington grumbling about McCarthy's strategies for 2024 spending and warning that they're ready to shut down the floor once again if the Speaker doesn't meet their ill-defined demands. What are their demands? I haven't been overly pleased or participatory, but I'll just say that I don't think we're moving in the right direction as far as solving this massive growth in national debt, said Representative Andy Biggs, former head of the far-right Freedom Caucus of the McCarthy talks. Of course, he didn't care about the massive growth in federal debt, national debt under Trump, but that's gimmitarianism for you. My biggest concern is, what's the coalition that the Speaker has built? He continued. We want to know who his coalition partners are. Is it the Democrats, or is it going to be the conservative voices and the other Republicans in the conference? Asked whether the conservatives would resort to their successful strategy of blocking floor action, Biggs didn't pause. I think it's always on the table. He said, I'm an all-tools guy. Well, he is a tool. Anyway, that is a distinct possibility, who says Representative Matt Gaetz, who gets himself in every story. And he echoed this when asked whether the floor could shut down this week. Those threats highlight the dilemma of facing McCarthy and GOP leaders as they attempt the delicate balancing act of cutting deals with Biden and the Democrats for the sake of enacting must-pass bills like raising the debt ceiling and funding the government, without infuriating the conservative firebrands who view deficits as a greater threat than a default or a shutdown, which is not really what they do. And that, too, is a generous grant to them on behalf of the Hill, to no one's surprise. I'm not worried about a shutdown, said Representative Ralph Norman. The country is going to be permanently shut down if we don't get our spending under control, and I'm tired of hearing we'll do it tomorrow. We already heard that quote last time. After shutting down the House floor 2 weeks ago, the conservative rebels backed off their revolt last Monday, announcing they would let legislative business resume for the time being. Emerging from a closed-door meeting with McCarthy, Gates, one of the 11 GOP defectors, said the group would work toward negotiating the power-sharing agreement conservatives struck with McCarthy during January's drawn-out speaker race, a characterization McCarthy has disputed. McCarthy has tapped the familiar top deputy, Representative Garrett Graves of Louisiana, to help in the effort to mitigate the conservatives' concerns. According to those familiar with the talks, Graves took a lead in the negotiations with the White House over the debt ceiling bill, and he appears to be doing the same in the current talks. The speaker introduces Garrett and then 5 minutes later walks out, says Representative Ken Buck, another hardliner who helped gum up the floor earlier in the month. After days of talks last week, however, some conservatives said there were no breakthroughs to report. Haven't had anything new since Monday, said Representative Matt Rosendale of Montana, as he was leaving Washington late last week. I guess we'll see what the next week brings to us. Asked what requests he's made of leadership, Rosendale was vague. I never asked for anything but good government, he told the reporter. That's what you need to put in there. Okay. We just got to put some good into the, put good government in that bill. I got to go back to Montana. Okay. Anyway, but if there's no progress by the time the House is set to vote on another rule, which could happen as soon as Wednesday, Gates last week suggested conservatives might block floor activity once again. There will be more votes next week and more rules. And if there's not a negotiated power sharing agreement, then perhaps we'll be back here next week, he told reporters last Monday. Despite the lack of any concrete agreement, some of the rebels said they were satisfied McCarthy would give them a greater voice in the budget talks to come. I think he just committed to us that we would forge ahead with a fiscally conservative agenda, and he gave us his word that he would work with us and keep us in the loop, Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee said. And I think that's the key thing, as he should with all different factions of the party. Representative Bob Good of Virginia, another one of the Republican rebels, aired an optimistic tone about the direction of talks with McCarthy. There have continued to be constructive, healthy conversations on how we're going to work together this entire conference to cut spending, Good said on Thursday. Asked whether they were making progress, he said, I think so. My hope would be that we'll see that demonstrated going forward. Not all the GOP rabble-rousers, however, were pleased with the progress or lack thereof made thus far. Okay, well, I mean, that covers it. I think those who were satisfied and those who were not, or who satisfied with progress and those with the lack, disappointed with the lack thereof. Okay, it's not going well, and we don't have future meeting schedules, Gates said on Thursday. The talks with McCarthy were going poorly, he said, because they're all about spending at this stage of the game, an issue that has been center stage in the leadership conservative squabble. The GOP hardliners for months have pushed for cuts to fiscal year 2024 spending to get it down to 22 levels, which could lead to the reduction of about $130 billion from current spending. But the debt limit deal struck by Biden and McCarthy set 2024 spending well above that figure, essentially frozen at 2023 levels, with a 1% increase net set for 2025 in a move that infuriated conservatives. In an apparent attempt to allay that anger, Representative Kay Granger of Texas, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, said her panel would mark up bills below the cap at 2022 levels, but even that show of good faith, as you know, was not enough to earn the trust of GOP hardliners who accused leadership of utilizing budgetary gimmicks known as rescissions to make the cuts appear larger than they are. The American people aren't stupid, Good said. The American people need us to cut spending. Except if they need you to cut spending, then they might be stupid after all. Okay. Another development. On a different front, John Durham to testify on Capitol Hill after scathing report. Michael Schnell is the author of this piece, too. Let's see what's going on here. Trump-era Special Counsel John Durham, scheduled to testify on Capitol Hill this week, just over a month since he released that his scathing report, I guess, on the investigation into former President Trump's alleged ties to Russia, except no one got scathed because it didn't show anything. I don't know. Durham, who was appointed to investigate how the FBI launched a probe into Trump's 2016 campaign and possible contacts with Russia, is set to appear before the House Intelligence Committee and the House Judiciary Committee. The Intelligence Committee hearing will take place behind closed doors. I guess I don't see anything scheduled for the Senate because the Senate's not interested in Durham's fake report. But they probably should have brought him to the floor or to testify to Congress before they voted on the Schiff censure, because that ended up failing. But there you go. Let's see. Also this week, they do note about that. Anna Paulina Luna is eyeing another vote on her resolution to censure Adam Schiff after Democrats and 20 Republicans successfully blocked the measure last week. The Congresswoman, however, made changes to the resolution to alleviate concerns among her GOP colleagues that have already flipped some no votes. And in the House, lawmakers, so I guess they are trying it again, maybe on the strength of Durham's testimony to a friendly committee. In the House, lawmakers will vote on a resolution condemning the housing of migrants in schools and could make an attempt to override President Biden's veto of a resolution to overturn his student loan relief plan. On the Senate side, the chamber would vote on the Chile tax treaty. Oh, okay. Well, super exciting. So Durham's scheduled to be on the Hill this week to testify before these two House panels, set to testify behind closed doors for the House Intelligence Committee. Durham's report, product of roughly 4 years of investigation, they say issued a scathing assessment of the FBI's process and how it started and then proceeded with in the investigation. But, of course, he won no cases based on it, so I guess all he can do is run around and scathe. He has no record to run on. No one was convicted of anything of importance. So there you have it. Florida, let's jump down here on the list a little bit that he offers. Florida Republican eyes Schiff censure resolution round 2. Did they describe the changes? In this, the resolution calls for censuring and condemning Schiff for conduct that misleads the American people in a way that is not befitting an elected member of the House of Representatives. Luna introduced the measure in May, but brought it to the floor as a privileged resolution last week, forcing the House to take action on it. 20 Republicans joined Democrats in voting for a motion to table the measure, which was enough for the motion to pass and for the censure resolution to be blocked. Luna, however, is aiming for the House to vote on the resolution again this week after making changes to the resolution. Let's see. Ahead of last week's vote, Representative Tom Massey, one of the GOP no votes. How do you like that? Was he a no vote on, well, I think they mean a yes vote for tabling and a no vote on moving forward, but okay. Voiced concerns with a non-binding whereas clause in the bill that said if the Ethics Committee finds that Schiff lied, made misrepresentations, and abused sensitive information, then he should be fined $16 million. He argued that it violated the 8th and 27th Amendments. Luna's spokesperson, however, told Axios that her office has removed the fine to address the concerns of those that voted no, adding that they have gotten excellent feedback so far and are looking forward to next week. The change appears to have relieved some GOP concerns. Thank you for fixing your bill for next week, Massey wrote on Twitter earlier on Thursday. I respect the Constitution and the oath we take to it. These revisions address my concerns, and I will vote to hold Representative Schiff accountable, said Representative Mark Molinaro, another earlier no vote, said in a tweet on Thursday as well. Okay, so, I mean, I guess the 8th Amendment, of course, is the cruel and unusual punishment prohibition. The 27th Amendment is actually has to do with congressional pay, and that there won't be any changes to congressional pay made without an election intervening. And I guess he figures a $16 million fine is a change to congressional pay. I'm not certain that it actually does impact congressional pay. It impacts him personally, and that may be his only pay. But okay, whatever. Those are his concerns. Fine. $16 million was a ridiculous sum anyway. And I guess in recognition of how ridiculous and ungrounded in anything it was, she's agreed to drop it. It wasn't that important to her. All right. So that is of some interest. Meanwhile, I guess maybe we can wrap things up by scrolling back down to something that has been lingering, something we started reading and never finished, or maybe did we ever even begin reading this piece? I don't know. The Mother Jones piece, one I mentioned that might make good weekend reading one of these days. John Durham's report used sketchy intelligence that might be Russian disinformation. I guess that's got some renewed currency again now that he's coming back to Capitol Hill, and I guess you can probably expect to see some questions asked of him during his appearance that have maybe been drawn from this article or others similar to it. Dan Friedman is the reporter on this one. We'll read what we can in the closing minutes of the show. Durham's final report blasts the FBI. That's the scathing part, I guess. Scathing, but it's not particularly grounded in its scathing. Blasts the FBI for using the so-called Steele dossier, a compilation of unconfirmed claims about Donald Trump and Russia, without sufficiently considering the chance that Steele's findings contain deliberate Russian falsehoods. But Durham himself relies substantially on a sketchy intelligence product that may be Russian disinformation to push a partisan political narrative. And he does not even note the irony. That's the real crime here. Always note irony. Durham, the special counsel, you know who he is, whom former Attorney General Bill Barr selected in 2019, may have succeeded in his apparent goal of serving up rehated scraps for a familiar retinue of hardcore Donald Trump defenders to feast on. House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan announced last week, this is a while back, I guess, that he wants Durham to appear before the committee on Thursday, but that testimony remains unscheduled. Now it's coming online here. But when was this written? This was written in May 25th. So it took a while, but they're getting him in front of them after all. That testimony was unscheduled, but now we know it's coming to fruition. The Judiciary Committee did not respond to requests about the delay. Obituaries for his 4-year, $7 million investigation have noted Durham's repeated failures to secure courtroom convictions and pointed out how meek his conclusions were compared to the wild expectations of Trump fans. But a different shortcoming in Durham's work, its astounding hypocrisy, may not be getting the attention it deserves. The special counsel's 306-page report refers 65 times to the, quote, Clinton plan intelligence. That is a claim that Hillary Clinton, on July 26, 2016, approved a plan to, quote, vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by the Russian security services. Where does this supposed intelligence come from? Those very same Russian security services. Interesting. The note claims, or the report notes, that the Clinton plan intelligence came from a Russian intelligence analysis and that U.S. intelligence agencies got their hands on it. Think about that. To figure out how an American presidential campaign supposedly went about attacking a rival campaign, Durham relied on information that U.S. intelligence gathered on claims made by Russian intelligence agents about what they supposedly found by spying on Americans. That's a pretty roundabout way to learn the kind of information you'd expect to see in Playbook. And this game of spy telephone was actually even longer than Durham details. According to the New York Times, U.S. spies obtained their insight into Russian intelligence from Dutch intelligence, which was spying on the Russians as the Russians spied on Americans. Durham seems to have found no other confirmation for his Clinton plan intelligence. That's reason enough for skepticism. A little bit not unlike Republicans who are running around saying we got to have that FBI form because we know that there are tapes of Biden acknowledging that he accepted the bribes, except we can't find the tapes, but we're pretty sure that there's a conspiracy to hide the tapes too. It's like the Whitey tape all over again. We're sure there's a tape. We just can't find the tape. Yeah, well, That's the reason the FBI didn't go any further than this interview, because they couldn't find any evidence that anything else had gone on. Well, we think people are hiding the evidence. Well, then find it. We can't. There's a conspiracy. Well, then you just lose. Sorry. But there's more. There's a bigger problem. Russian security services did hack Clinton's campaign to help Trump, according to the entire U.S. intelligence community and the Senate Intelligence Committee. Yet Durham relies on those Russian spies for insights into how Clinton reacted to the hack. That is like the cops citing a bank robber who says the bank framed him. Durham admits that the Clinton plan intelligence may be a fabrication. Then he cites it anyway, extensively. He laments the FBI's startling and inexplicable failure to use the supposed plan to put the brakes on the Bureau's Trump-Russia probe. He also suggests Clinton's machinations may have in part triggered the FBI's investigation. And by the way, I wonder if there's any relationship between this and the news this morning about the slowness of the FBI to begin actually investigating Trump's own connections, direct connections to January 6th. Do they feel chastened in any way, even though they were ultimately vindicated, I'd say, by this Durham report? Durham, anyway, doesn't explain his claim, but that didn't concern Trump's defenders. The Russian collusion conspiracy was invented by Clinton operatives. Frequent Trump apologist Jonathan Turley wrote in the New York Post, the Russian hoax was a figment of Hillary Clinton's imagination, Senator Marsha Blackburn declared. This isn't just false, it would require time travel. Durham himself confirms that the FBI launched its investigation into Trump and Russia based on events that occurred months prior to Clinton's alleged July 26th approval of this supposed plan. In April of 2016, George Papadopoulos, a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign, met with a professor with Kremlin ties who informed him that Russia had obtained dirt on Clinton in the form of thousands of emails, as Robert Mueller's final report noted. A week later, according to Mueller, Papadopoulos suggested to a representative of a foreign government that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of damaging materials. When hacked Democratic emails were indeed published by WikiLeaks on July 22nd, this foreign diplomat alerted U.S. officials to what Papadopoulos had said. Time now for us to get the hell out of here and play this music. But the FBI quickly launched an official investigation into the Trump campaign's Russia ties in response to that tip, Durham notes, while arguing that they should have begun only a preliminary investigation. In other words, they should have taken things slow, which is apparently what they ended up doing with January 6th, although I wish they had reversed that, perhaps. It was the same Russian hack, not Hillary Clinton, that drove media attention, even before the documents were leaked to the public. A June 14th, 2016 Washington Post report, Russian government hackers penetrated DNC, stole opposition research on Trump, kicked off a boatload of stories about Trump's financial ties to Russia and his fawning posture toward Vladimir Putin. There is plenty more. Not that we're going to be able to get through it, but since John Durham is coming back to Capitol Hill and testifying, perhaps this is good background to have. Perhaps it's something you want to read on background yourself before he begins testifying. And if you want to just shift your focus to perhaps something else just as interesting, well, of course, there's the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. Justice Putnam takes you through his collection of stories, including the hostile takeover of the PGA Tour by Saud-backed Live Golf has sparked outrage, and congressional Democrats are demanding answers. I guess everyone just really loves golf. What can you do?
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Action on Capitol Hill addressed here too. Corporate and political opponents of President Biden's signature Inflation Reduction Act have intensified their campaign to kill broad swaths of the law before it takes effect. And that, plus, of course, as always, a collection of stories from around the country and around the world. Don't forget the rest of the world today. Coming up next.